Marcel Duchamp's Fountain from 1917 and My Bed by Tracey Emin from 1999. And my paper's called Object Users and Abusers, Marcel Duchamp and Tracey Emin as authors of their work. So upon entering Tate Britain on occasion of the 1999 Turner Prize, visitors and journalists alike were uniformly stricken when confronted with a bed base and mattress weighed down with rumpled, stained sheets and pillows, alongside of which were cluttered an assortment of items, from vodka bottles to slippers and underwear, cigarette packs to condoms and contraceptives, Polaroid self-portrait to a white, fluffy toy. This was My Bed, by British artist Tracey Emin, presented in the state which Emin claimed had been after a period of suicidal depression, during which he had not risen from it in several days. My Bed was a moment of life frozen in time, crime scene-like. The sensation of voyeuristic insight into the artist's past and personal, intimate personhood through the medium of daily life debris both evokes and commels the usually polarised notions of artistic sublimation with that of the found object. Emin's installation recalls French Dada king Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, ordering manufactured objects which the artist selected, modified and presented as art by merely placing them within a gallery. Amongst these, his infamous fountain, here on your right, especially proposes interesting parallels to My Bed. Duchamp distinguishes his ready-mades as mass-produced objects transformed to art by the artist's mere selection, with no exercise of taste. In this sense, Emin seems a natural heir to Duchamp, presenting her bed and belongings in a state deeply stained, yet artistically virginal, not manipulated, but simply as an object displaced. Julian Stallabrass describes both Duchamp and Emin as having a sort of Midas touch, turning the banal into art within the white walls of a museum space. It is with Duchamp's beliefs on notions of authorship, however, that My Bed jars. Duchamp's exhibition of prefabricated objects as artwork disrupts the monographic humanist discipline aspect of art history, which sets the author as master of work, with chief claim of authority as its maker. So these ideas also foreshadow the writings of such writers as Barthes and Derrida on the author question in the 1960s. In The Death of the Author, Barthes concordantly declares that the time of the author cult is both historical and over. Denying the existence of the individual creator, Barthes asserts that the author figure is in fact subject to a multitude of preceding voices and cannot therefore claim to make entirely independently inspired originality. Whilst Duchamp's approach to the author question differs somewhat from Barthes insofar it does not refer to previous voices, Duchamp was actually quite original. The artist did present himself only as a mediator for his art and part of a chain of production for an object ultimately intended for the viewer, for the Barthian reader, to decrypt meaning from. Despite offering us an object in which she too was only one part of the assembly line for, Emin, however, firmly establishes a dictatory, univocal reading of her ready-made object. Her naked candour, in fact, makes true reading unnecessary. Her identity and intentions are screamed at the viewer's face through the Polaroid portrait. Her fragility and vulnerability pulsate from the empty bottles. Her ownership of the bed is asserted in the imprint of her body upon it. In My Bed, Emin, the artist, the author, is very much eminent. Tracey Emin is not just symbolically, but physically imprinted in the work. She not only prefers a physical found object to the audience to consume as art, but turns her own person into an eminent domain in the legal sense, offering the power to take something previously conceived as private property into public use. Emin's life history becomes her art. In lieu of paint strokes, menstruation blood and fecal marks soil underwear. As manipulation of material, we see crumpled sheets and used condoms. In place of a painterly landscape, empty bottles litter the floor, mapping out a mindscape seeking escape. Instead of Duchamp's detachment from his ready-made, we see the ready-made made own, adorned with the skid marks of a subject's conscious and unconscious. Considering the question of artistic sublimation, the cult of the order which pervades postmodern art, and the Duchampian question of what constitutes an art object, one must question, however, to what extent soiled knickers can really be considered a sublimatory expression of the artist's tortured soul. So, as a prefabricated item like fountain, the bed's nature as a functional object is significant not only in its questioning of its status as art, but also in the taboo nature of beds' functions and implications themselves. The often jarring context into which the found object is placed, gallery or museum in most cases, is a highly relevant factor, dignifying the commonplace object as a challenge to the accepted distinction between what was considered art and what was not. Fountain, as a urinal, is associated with the bodily functions of urinating and the often ignored space of the bathroom, not as stage for romanticised feminine toilette, but as the liminal space for ungraceful primal needs. These abject associations no doubt contributed to Fountain's initial popular condemnation as vulgar, more so undoubtedly than the perhaps more innocent bottle wrap or comb. In a similar manner, My Bed evokes the private sphere and the accompanying personal habits hidden from society's sight. Many of life's key intimate moments, such as being born, dreaming, sleeping, copulating, birthing and dying, happen in bed. My Bed and Fountain go beyond the displacement of the banal into the public space to that of the taboo and the anathemic. We are confronted with a piece of someone else's domestic privacy, an alien sphere stained with the witnesses of a life breaking down. One response to Emin's work was the Independent on Sundays debate, asking readers, would you show your bed in public? This is indicative of the form of Emin and Duchamp's work as examining the neurosis of polite society, exposing the usually privatised to fairly predictable effect. Emin's method of naked psychological honesty evokes Freud's psychoanalytic ideas on libidinal sublimation, which I mentioned earlier, as a method of artistic creation. According to Freud, the artistic's erotic energy, stemming mostly from a deeply fractured self, as Emin much publicises, is allowed little expression within constraining human society and civilization, but can find an outlet through translation into physical form. This was the foundation, for instance, for abstract expressionism, with the angry throwing paint at the canvas as an expression of inner turmoil. Physical artistic gesture is an artist's signature of the soul, evidence of the actual process behind the work's creation. In the case of Fountain, the only mark made by Duchamp upon his prize urinal was indeed a signature. Critically, not his own, however, but that of his infamous alter ego, R. Mutt. Later in life, Duchamp commented on the author who created this work. He said, Mutt comes from Mott Works, the name of a large sanitary equipment manufacturer, but Mott was too close, so I altered it to Mutt after the daily cartoon strip Mutt and Jeff. The complete disavowal of his own identity in favour of a tongue-in-cheek pseudonym inspired by an industrial manufacturer and pop culture character highlights Duchamp's parody of the conventional role and significance of artist. Emin's bed, on the contrary, bore no name, but her signature was staged within and by the installation as a whole. The work of the signature, according to Derrida, is to stand in the place of the person who signed. The signature is indexical of the once present but now absent artist. Within this logic, My Bed's towsal state suggests occupation by figures who have come and gone. In this implicit presence, Duchampian physical separation from the object's formation seems completely opposite. In considering the bed a ready-made object, Emin's brand of authorship is nevertheless not physically founded either, but rather built on the reciprocal relationship of art and life. Hers is an art from the heart, wrought from personal experience. I here include for comparison Robert Rauschenberg's bed, composed of a pillow, sheet and quilts, a bit like Emin's, but which he spattered with paint in a style similar to the abstract expression strip painted Jackson Pollock, rather than body sweat. His bed, like Emin, becomes a sort of intimate self-portrait, consistent with this assertion that painting relates to both art and life. Asking why do we consume Tracey Emin's misery so eagerly, Natasha Walter concludes that by making a parade of her suffering, the artist stands at the end of a long tradition of artists who've gained esteem through public self-flagellation, so playing to older tropes of the dysfunctional soul, out of control, out of mind. This is conducive of Barthes's notions that nothing is wholly original, which could suggest that Emin, in her self-construction, consciously exploits the tropes of tortured artists and carefully chooses a symbolically loaded object, anticipating its mediatic, sensationalist appeal. In his book High Art Light, Salabras criticises much writing on Emin as being fatally weak in distinguishing true expressionism and authenticity, too swept up in issues of Emin as a figurehead and grounded in beliefs of her personal integrity. Salabras's criticism not only questions Emin's self-mythologization, but identifies a slippage between what he sees as a license to apply the full apparatus of aesthetic theory, media theory, and psychobabble to Emin's oeuvre, as if all this were inherent to the work itself. The implication is of a cult of the artist dominating the product until they simply cannot be received without Emin as author, as the signature. Duchamp's de-emphasization of his role is reflective of his wish for plurality and openness of meaning, preferring his work to the spectator reader to interpret. He seems to say that whether a work is his or Armat's is in fact irrelevant to the work itself. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, which in its own displaced nature opens itself up to interpretation rather than merely personifying its maker and his story and perpetuating the understanding of author as God. With Emin's authorial presence imbued in the work, to what extent then is My Bed ultimately dependent on our belief in Emin's personal integrity to be of any artistic credibility whatsoever? The Tracey Emin trading card was among the original set of 12 cards by theory.org.uk of 2000-2001, which featured concepts close to the heart of people interested in social and cultural theory, gender and identity, and media studies. Her listed strengths, weaknesses, and special skills reproduce the familiar patterns so repeatedly associated to her and perpetuated by her, such as the conflicting traits of emotional openness with cynical exploitation of the public's dodgy curiosity. In her exploration of Emin's confessional mode, Rosemary Betterton also considers the autobiographical elements less as a direct outpouring of the soul and more as a highly mediated and artful self-construction. She considers the tactic of apparent self-revelation of My Bed not so much as exhibitionism, but rather as a sort of feminized genre of daytime television shows where audiences at home consume not so much commodities as experiences as they watch subjects confess the private in public. For all her stories, Emin in fact becomes stripped of personhood, becoming merely synonymous with a set of signifieds such as sensation and self-exposure. Her notoriety and celebrity could be compromising with authenticity, as her fame significations now to an adolescent enfant terrible and dysfunctional seaside slut now perhaps disallow her to explore subsequent, arguably more mature selfhoods. This concern was alluded to by Emin herself, stating once in an interview that people think because my life has become more comfortable, my work will get insipid, but inside, my heart is still in turmoil over things. This is revelatory of perhaps the ineluctable truth that without turmoil, there is no art for Emin. If Emin is her own greatest work of art, a masterpiece in convincing and sustained self-construction, what might happen when she, the absent present in the rumpled bed, is no longer around? Alistair Sooke said of this that Emin is her art to such an extent that without her backstory to hand, the half-life of the objects that she preserves and makes might quickly decay. Interestingly, this has always been the case for Fountain. The original object was lost in 1917 and only lives on in photographs or as one of the 15 authorised replicas, one of them is at Tate Modern. Did the controversy merely successfully outlive the object? Was it in fact the concept, which was so informative of the development of modern contemporary art, which inspired Emin, which was key and rendered the material object unnecessary in the perpetuation of an idea that could be mass-produced like the ready-made itself? Or is in fact the sheer lack of information provided by Duchamp, the mystery and the openness to endless reinterpretation that has kept authors and enthusiasts writing posthumously almost a century after Fountain's eruption and disappearance? Emin, as heart and soul interpretation of her art, is the only narrative, her body the paint and her history the glue. Had the stories become boring? Without them, her dirty bed just reverts to being a dirty bed. And wouldn't that just be a bad copy job of Fountain? We could consider My Bed maybe to be a postmodern version of the Dada object, displacing and aggrandizing the everyday object, yet also self-referentially overloading it. Emin's profound self-awareness was exemplified on occasion of her drunken storming out on a late-night Channel 4 debate in '97, chastising the panel as she went with the words, "You people aren't relating to me anymore, you've lost me." As Stalabras notes, to reject the art is to reject the artist. But this infamy, as Barth suggests, is not only Tracey Emin's. Critics have retold time and time again the rags to riches fairy tale of artists, the more sensational the better. Van Gogh's hacked off ear is probably as famous as his sunflowers. Emin's work and approach perpetuate an archaic notion of the cult of the author as crazed genius in all its Enlightenment ideal, with some body fluid thrown in. It is hardly surprising that Duchamp's deliberately oblique self-referentialism and revolutionary detachment from his own work continues to inspire and intrigue to this day. The original fountain was only seen by a handful of people, never publicly exhibited, and vanished shortly after its christening in 1917, and yet has become an icon of 20th century high culture. Stieglitz's photograph, which is the one I included at the beginning, is the only remaining record of the original object. It was reproduced with an anonymous manifesto in avant-garde magazine The Blind Man, claiming, "Whether Mr. Mutt made the fountain with his own hands or not has no importance. He chose it. He created a new thought for that object." It was this publication, as much as the initial scandal, which made fountains fame. With Emin's work, it is the very reading she imposes upon the object which provokes, her simultaneous self-aggrandizing and self-abjecting mythologies, leaving the audience questioning whether to be awed or dismissive. Yet whether it's trash talk or toilet bowl wheeled into the gallery space, both seem most powerful in their destabilization of the prescriptions of high art, their introduction of the less tasteful aspects of the everyday into the hallowed halls of culture, and their ambivalent positions between irreverent superstars and everyday users of objects, both to the wonderment of the gallery. Thank you. Anyone has any questions? No? Okay, thank you so much. Yay.